Mr. Guthrie, spade's in your hands.
Thank you. Mr. Petrides, on behalf of defendant Isaiah Chance, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. I know this is a lot, one after another. We just keep coming up here, but I appreciate your patience. Ladies and gentlemen, the beginning of this case, which was a while ago, the state came in and told us they're going to have a picture. They had a confident picture they were going to tell you about a conspiracy, a gang war, 3 killers, and a surveillance team, all coordinated, all disciplined, and that it pointed back to, among others, to Isaiah Chance. You've seen everything the state has at this point, all the witnesses, all the evidence, all the exhibits. I'm going to ask you to ask yourself a question during my closing, during the state's closing, and when you're back in the room deliberating. Did the state prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, with actual evidence, not speculation, that Isaiah Chance knew murder was being planned, agreed to participate in it, and took some act in furtherance of that murder? Or do they want you to speculate your way to a guilty verdict? Because that's what the case comes down to. Not whether a murder occurred, because sadly one did, but what Isaiah Chance's involvement in that murder was, if any. On any one of those questions the state has given you, I would submit speculation, not evidence. The court has instructed you on the burden of proof. It is a very high burden. The state must prove every element of every charge, every fact that is necessary to prove those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. They must rule out everything, every reasonable doubt, and all those elements and all the facts necessary to prove that charge. That, again, Isaiah knew of a specific plan, intentionally agreed to participate in the plan, and did some act in furtherance. You cannot stack inferences on top of inferences, speculations on top of speculations. They need to be rooted in actual evidence. I submit the state has not done that. Let's talk about some of the speculations and inferences the state wants you to go on. That the Spaces chat was not banter between 2 people, but had to be proof of murderous intent. That being in Tampa could only be purposeful participation in a murder plot. That Mr. Chance booked the Airbnb with specific advanced knowledge of the plan to kill Charles Jones. That Mr. Chance, not Alicia Andrews, was using her phone all night. That a single phone call that night from Mr. Chance could only have been passing murderous knowledge from one person to another. Could be for no other reason. They cannot rule out any other reason. That Mr. Chance knew what was in the bags being placed into the Impala. That Mr. Chance knew what the Impala was planning that night. That any photos posted after the homicide could only be celebration photos for no other reason. That Mr. Chance was driving the car that entire night, not possibly, probably, Miss Andrews. And this was all done in furtherance of a street gang, criminal gang, excuse me. 12 inferences. I would argue each of those inferences, any of those inferences standing alone is reasonable doubt, and they have all of those inferences. Let's start with the first. Did Isaiah Chance know a murder was planned? It starts with the Spaces chat. I'm not going to play the Spaces chat. You can play it to yourself. But you heard what Detective Drabeck said. He said it didn't sound angry. You have them going back and forth. Mr. Jones actually says, I don't believe the allegations against you. You have Mr. Chance say, how's your foot? The state says that's him goading him. Mr. Jones doesn't seem to take it that way. He says, my foot's good. And Mr. Jones is the one that says, got bigger fish to fry. And Chance, kind of in a juvenile fashion, says, you got bigger fish to fry. And that's basically the chat. Not angry. Mr. Jones isn't taunting him. Mr. Jones isn't making fun of him. Isaiah Chance doesn't seem angry at anyone. But they tell you that has to be murderous intent. They also claim that Mr. Jones is Isaiah Chance's arch rival and mortal enemy. And I would ask you to look at one piece of evidence in this case that remotely proves any of that. This is all speculation by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office that Isaiah Chance apparently hatred of Charles Jones. No proof of that. The only time we know them talking to each other is that Spaces chat, and I submit that doesn't remotely prove that. And they talk about what Mr. Gathright and Rashad Murphy were talking about possibly that chat, but Sean Gathright or Rashad Murphy mentions Instagram as well, so they might not even talking about that Spaces chat. And we have no idea if they ever talked to Isaiah Chance after their conversation with each other. Then we look at the Instagram post that happened prior to the murder by Mr. Chance. Again, Detective Drabeck initially says, Detective Ramos initially say, when we first saw him, we didn't think anything of them. It's only after they have Isaiah Chance as a suspect that they say, okay, now we look at him, now they're proof of intent for murder. That's not investigation, that's confirmation bias. Isaiah Chance was upset at something. He was upset at apparently the rumors that he was being called homosexual. That upset him. However, again, Mr. Jones said he didn't believe those rumors, and there was no indication from those Instagram posts from Mr. Chance prior to the murder that he was upset at Charles Jones. He was upset at someone. It is not clear who he was upset at. Again, there's no recorded conversation, no text, no call, no witness that says Isaiah Chance was mad at Charles Jones, and that would be required for him to have the intent to kill him. Even if you believe Isaiah Chance knew something was going to happen, and I submit you don't know that, again, you need to prove he specifically intended his death. The state also points to his anger about Antonio Tilley, but again has no proof that he blames Charles Jones for the death of Antonio Tilley. Antonio Tilley was allegedly involved, possibly, over a personal dispute involving a female, and the person who shot him was not in the gang. So again, that's a leap to get from that to specifically blaming Charles Jones as being behind Tilley's murder. Then we get to what did Isaiah Chance do as an act in furtherance of this alleged plan that he was involved in, that they can't prove that he ever made a deal to be involved in. The state says that he was in the Cruz, he was on the surveillance team, is what they call it, providing real-time surveillance information of Charles Jones. Let's go along the way. We do know that he drove to Teasers. That we know. That's on the video. You can see that yourself. However, the Cruz leaves Teasers when Charles Jones is still inside. Then goes to multiple places around Hillsborough Avenue, 13th, 15th, I think 19th, I can't remember exactly. You have it all back there. Detective Ramos isn't exactly sure. He knows he goes to multiple places. Again, he follows up on Fizzle in Jacksonville very well. It suggests they didn't really follow up on where Isaiah Chance and Alicia Andrews went on Hillsborough quite as well. Didn't get any video from there, didn't check up on that. However, we know he goes other places. He's not following Charles Jones at this point. And we also know the Impala then gets to Teasers the minute, or within a minute, of Charles Jones leaving. But the Cruz is no longer there. How did the Impala know to get there? Couldn't have been from the Cruz. And then we go to Truth. Now, at this point, we have no idea who's driving the Cruz. From the point where they leave Teasers, we have no idea who's driving the Cruz. They get to Truth. We have the photo from Alicia Andrews' phone, never sent to anyone. That's specifically from her phone, not Mr. Chance's phone. And we see later that the Impala is specifically, as the detective called it, staged across the street, watching what's going on. And we see when the entourage leaves, the Impala follows them. The Cruz is not needed for any of that. Now, we go to the Home 2 Suites. This is on the way to Airbnb, as Detective Ramos says. The Cruz is following it. This is where the state will suggest that Alicia Andrews gives her location information, which brings the Impala to the Home 2 Suites. Except it doesn't work like that, because when you share your location, it's your actual location. And when you see the order of the cars, the Cruz does not go into the Home 2 Suites until after the Impala goes to the Home 2 Suites. So if they were truly following the location, the Impala would not have went to the Home 2 Suites, because the Cruz goes right in east on Fowler and comes back around west, then across the street into USF Embassy Suites. So if they were following the location, they would have followed them there. They didn't do that. They went directly, the Impala went directly into the home 2 suites. How did they know to go there? Were they getting information from a different source? Were they off camera and followed them? The state can't rule that out. Detective Ramos says the Cruz was staged across the street, but there's no video evidence of that. That's just a speculation. We do not know how they found out to go into the home 2 suites. Again, the state and Detective Ramos says it must be these other apps. This must be this other apps. But as Mr. Wise said, there's no evidence of that. And as Mr. Wise also said, they're going back and forth between apps that they know they can hide and apps that they can't. It doesn't make any sense. And again, must have is not evidence. And it's definitely not beyond a reasonable doubt. And the Impala, having been staged across the street at Truth, would have seen where Mr. Jones got into the car. It wouldn't need any further information about where he was sitting. And at the home 2 suites, where the Cruz does go in, there's no indication there was any communication between the 2 cars at that point. The state wants you to assume that they talked to each other without any proof. The state even says no one can be identified in this case. They were talking about the shooters, but it truly could mean anyone because they cannot identify who's driving that Cruz outside of one time in the beginning of the night. They also can't prove who was using Miss Andrews' phone all night. They keep saying that every time they put a picture up of a conversation, it always had Alicia Andrews, saw the picture of Isaiah Chance. But it was based on something coming from Miss Andrews' phone. Now, we know Miss Andrews used her phone a lot. We know, for instance, this is her texting about an Airbnb in Tampa. No suggestion from the state or Detective Ramos. This wasn't her, so they assume this is her using her phone. This is her on her phone. She looked up a picture of the victim, Charles Jones. Again, no indication from Detective Ramos. I don't believe that that's not her using her phone. It's her using her phone then, but later they want you to believe Isaiah Chance is using her phone despite having his own phone and using his own phone. Again, she tries to book the Airbnb. Here's the Airbnb, and if, again, above it, here's where tempted to book the Aloft, Tampa. I would submit that is the beginning of the word Midtown. Aloft being Midtown, being nowhere near Teasers or that area. The state said they were using Alicia Andrews to blend in, or Isaiah was using Alicia Andrews to blend in at Teasers and Truth. Speculation, no proof of that. There's plenty of single men, multiple men, and there's no indication that that was the reason for that she wasn't simply just involved. So the attorney says Sean Gathright and Alicia Andrews were using their phones, but then wants you to believe by that she means Isaiah Chance. But when Sean Gathwright's texts come in, they want you to assume it's from Sean Gathright. But when Alicia Andrews' texts come in, they want you to believe it's Isaiah Chance. I would argue it doesn't work that way. The state said they didn't want to use gang members, except at the time, Rashad Murphy was not a gang member. He wasn't documented until after his homicide. So that doesn't make sense. And he said they wouldn't have let anyone else into this. Well, they allegedly let Alicia Andrews in. She's not in a gang. They let Sean Gathright in. They allegedly let Isaiah Chance in. They would be what the detectives called, I think, creative players. So they're letting whoever they want in, I would argue. Now let's, again, what do the state? They cannot rule out that Alicia Andrews wasn't driving the Cruz at those locations. They cannot rule out that she wasn't using her phone all night. They cannot rule out the Impala didn't find Charles Jones on their own, either with someone from inside his own entourage. We know Kayla Enright was actually trying to get information and did. We know Mizzle associated with both sides and was not found at the crime scene where the murder occurred. And Charles Jones was posting his location on social media. They didn't need a surveillance team. He was telling them, much to the dismay of Robert Howard. Again, we talk back to the Airbnb. we know someone went in that wasn't caught on camera. The state can't rule out that was Isaiah Chance at the very beginning, and he wasn't hiding, he just didn't caught on camera. We know that happened. They want to convict Isaiah Chance on association, not evidence. And I want to talk about J. Breezy and Young and Ace very quickly. One of the things the detective used to show that Isaiah Chance was involved in this was getting paid from J. Breezy. So that transaction was a piece of evidence that they think connects Isaiah Chance to this. So J. Breezy pays him, then J. Breezy brags about paying for a murder in a song. And then not only does he brag about it, they have the actual payment. They say. Is he investigated, arrested, or indicted? No. Is that because they don't believe songs? Well, they have evidence in this case. Or is it because they don't believe the evidence says what they think it says? Now, we heard from Robert Howard and Mr. Gonzalez talk about him, so I'm not going to rehash him very much, but I will say that what he told us about Isaiah Chance is all his conversations were friendly. Talked about music. They talked about just Jacksonville in general, that he was never a threat. Like I said, always friendly. The one thing they talked about the flyer, he said Isaiah told him that was silly to post it and to be careful. But again, he also said that he never felt threatened and everything was friendly, so he took that in a friendly manner, which it was, because as Robert Howard later told you, he thought it was silly to post your location everywhere. This was information he knew. Mr. Howard said he was just probing Mr. Chance, trying to get information. He took a liking to him. And after the murder, there's no calls from Mr. Chance to Mr. Howard, no bragging, no nothing. Now let's talk a little bit about the gang enhancement. It's a burden I don't believe the state can meet. They must prove that ATK or 1200, depending on what gang they believe Mr. Chance was in at the time, is a criminal street gang under the law, and you'll get all the law back there. They must prove he was a member, and then he committed a criminal act in furtherance of that gang. In furtherance of that gang. All three, not just membership. Is ATK even a criminal street gang? Excuse me. Is their primary activity crimes? I would argue it's not. Are they working together? I would argue they don't. What Detective Nieder said they're independent contractors. I didn't use that word. He used that word. Independent contractors. That's not a gang. Again, what they're most commonly known for is music. Now, there are drill raps, they're making fun of people, they're doing music. The state says they're known for murder. They mentioned about 7 murders over 8 years. That is too many murders, do not get me wrong. But I would argue that's not their primary activity.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach? Yes.
Majority of those murders, of all the murders over all these years, are unsolved. Cannot be, I would argue, remotely attributed to a gang or to a gang war, specifically to ATK. What crimes are committed for the benefit of the group? I would argue the detectives have not been able to show us any crimes for the benefit of the group. We talked about it in general. They say they do a crime, they then do a drill rap about it, and they make money off it. I would argue that is not for the benefit of the group. And again, if these songs were proof of criminal conduct, J. Breezy would at least be investigated. Again, they don't have structure, they don't have hierarchy. Now let's talk about the documentation of Isaiah Chance. The first one is the number 23 chain. Again, it's a very common number. Detective Nieder gets to decide that it means gang, and it only means Royale Smith. It cannot mean anything else. It cannot mean LeBron James. It cannot mean Michael Jordan. Has to mean gang. We know ATK members wear chains. You've seen an ATK member wear a chain on that screen at least once. Detective Nieder, Isaiah Chance has never worn an ATK chain. Then other criteria were from his social media. Multiple pictures, some used for multiple criteria, but there were a lot of pictures. But let's look at some of those pictures. Again, multiple detectives said, and witnesses, Isaiah Chance is a rapper. He's not a disc rapper. You make your decision yourself. To me, this looks like a photo shoot. And I think there's a couple things I'd like you to look at here. One is, what song they have here? Kenny Capps. Robert Howard, allegedly from the Ops. They're playing his song. And what's in the background? This gentleman, Isaiah Chance, allegedly ATK 1200. Gentleman, right above my finger. Again, look at it yourself. This is 126C. Given the alleged 1200 side down, which would mean disrespect to 1200, if that's where we're to believe that that is in fact only the 1200 sign, despite the fact that Robert Howard says that sign is used by all people all over not all people, but a lot of people all over Jacksonville for a lot of different reasons. And there are multiple pictures, so I'm only going to highlight two. And the only reason I highlight this one is Detective Meter says he can tell that's Isaiah Chance. I don't know if that's Isaiah Chance or not, and I would argue that no one can tell you that that's Isaiah Chance, besides if that is Isaiah Chance himself. He used that to document him, one of his many reasons. He also said he can print out an Instagram post like that, and it's considered physical evidence in his mind. I would argue that is not accurate, and that is not what the law intends. But this has to be your decision. Now, when Dr. Leek was testifying, the state made a big deal to say that she didn't check if he had gang tattoos. One of, and you're going to get this law back there, the ways to meet gang criteria is to have a gang tattoo. And you also saw, when Davion Murphy was arrested, they checked and see if he had gang tattoos. You heard from Detective Nieder, who documented Isaiah Chance, did not document as a gang tattoo. And you heard from the person who arrested him, Detective Ramos, nothing about a gang tattoo. He doesn't have a gang tattoo. The hand signs mean different things to different people, and I argue to suggest they mean only one thing. We heard it from Robert Howard. We see it in that picture. There's a post that you're going to get back there that Charles Jones does, where he does the thumbs down emoji, allegedly against his own gang or associate gang or whatever they want to call it. Again, there's no evidence that Isaiah Chance did anything to benefit himself through the gang. There's no evidence. They call him they say he's Mr. Rich Off War because he gets paid for this somehow. They haven't proved any of that. They simply haven't. Let's get back to the case itself. The forensic record. They have nothing they can use forensically, ballistically, against Isaiah Chance. No fingerprints, no DNA, no ballistics, no murder weapon recovered connected to him, no clothes matching the shooter's, no mask. In the Vivint video, this is what Officer DeJesus said, that he can look at these pictures and not only can he tell you that that's a gun, but he can tell you, I believe he said, the kind of gun, and that it has an extended mag. Now, I'm not here to tell you that's not a gun. That's your decision. I'm telling you that Officer DeJesus is reaching when he says he can say that, and I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that his testimony was reaching, because as Mr. Wise stated, he was a different witness on direct as he was cross. On direct, he answered every question. He was an expert. On cross, he wanted to fight with Mr. Wise, and all of a sudden couldn't agree. I don't know if he would agree the sky was blue. He also agreed on the theory that two of the bullets from the 9mm flew out of the 9mm and into the brass catcher. He said this was possible. This is after he stated that he couldn't think of one reason that anyone would use a brass catcher. He said two bullets flew into the brass catcher. That was possible from two people moving, despite the fact that for that to have happened, that the person who then unloaded the brass catcher would have to unload all the shells and put the two 9mm back, because that's how it was found. It doesn't make any sense. Then we talk about the DNA. There was some DNA, and the state would tell you Mr. Chance could not be excluded. But truly, he could not be included. We heard they use big numbers when they can, 700 billion, but they couldn't even give us a number, anything, on Mr. Chance It could not produce a meaningful result. It was I submit it's FDLE's way in saying we cannot include him. And the state doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. They don't get to say, well, we couldn't exclude him either. They have to prove that he touched that gun. They cannot do that. Let's look at what the state chose not to investigate. Again, we know Mr. Chance is at some point in the Cruz with Miss Andrews. We don't know who's driving. And we know that the LPR readers and other things are going off in the area of 15th and Hillsborough. We have no video from that area. They didn't try to get video. They didn't investigate that area. They went to the places they wanted to investigate. They didn't investigate the Cruz's infotainment system, which would have shown GPS data browsing history when they had the car. Ramos did not do that. Could have shown us a lot of what the Cruz was doing that night. We don't have that. They didn't get Robert Howard's phone. Could have backed up or undercut his testimony. It's in federal custody. They gave an explanation for that, but Detective Ramos simply, I would argue, didn't follow up on that because he got the answer he wanted. The search of Mr. Chance's house produced nothing connected to this murder. The gun was excluded from being involved in this murder, and as Detective Ramos said, he even said, I don't know if that's a gun necessarily, but if it does, it looks similar to the one found. He was at least honest about that in Mr. Chance's house, the one that was excluded. I'd actually look at those pictures too from Mr. Chance's house. There are bags in those pictures that I would submit look very similar to the bags that he was loading into the car at Mr. Gathride's house, bags that have clothes in them in Mr. Chance's house. Mr. Chance's interview. Mr. Chance sat down for, I don't remember exact time, around 2 hours with Detective Ramos. He told him he went to Tampa. He didn't lie about that. He told him he went with Sean Gathrite. He told him he went with Alicia Andrews. He told me he went to McDonald's. He said he went to a colorful club. Detective Ramos says he's lying because he can't provide an alibi, and he doesn't know the name of this club. Again, he is not from Tampa. There is indication that he went to clubs all around 15th and Hillsborough. In fact, he doesn't know a name for a club, which he even said, Detective Ramos, I wasn't there, I didn't go in, talked to a bouncer and left, I would argue is not evidence of lying. And again, someone who participated in this murder, someone who went to Tampa for this purpose, doesn't sit down for 2 hours with a detective and tell him about it. The state told you they're going to provide a complete picture of Isaiah Chance's involvement in this case, and I would submit what they've presented is speculation, social media, and gang allegations. They talked about the Spaces chat, they talked about social media. They want you to speculate on the meaning of all of those. They talked about the surveillance theory. They can't even put him driving the car or using the phone in that theory. It's a forensic record with zero. It's made of, this case is made of alternative explanations the state simply cannot rule out. Inferences stacked on top of each other, speculations. Isaiah Chance was in Tampa, and Charles Jones is dead, and that is a tragedy. But they still have not proved he knew about the plan, he agreed to the plan, he took an act in furtherance of that plan. Cannot build a conviction based on stacked inferences. The reasonable doubt standard exists primarily for a case, I would argue, like this, where the pressure is high to convict and the crime is terrible, and the evidence against a specific defendant is built on inference and speculation. The standard does not bend because the crime is serious. It holds for that very reason. The state has not proven Isaiah Chance guilty of first-degree murder or conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. They have not proven the gang enhancement. What they have proven is that he was in Tampa, and that is not enough. They want you to fill in the gaps from their case. What I told you they were going to ask you to do in opening, and I ask that you not do that here in closing. You hold them to their burden. And I believe the only verdict consistent with this evidence and consistent with the law is not guilty. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sonardi, on behalf of Defendant Davion Murphy, you may proceed.